Sunshine. No sunshine. Sunshine. No sunshine. Sunshine. Does it look like I have a goatee? Hi, hello, I'm Louise Quick and welcome to another episode of Quick Histories. I'm really excited because this week we are going to delve into the history of a Tudor queen. However, it's a Tudor queen you might not have heard of. See, the first woman to actually inherit the English crown was Lady Jane Grey. To all the medieval nerds out there, don't worry, I know that there are other women who you could argue were the first Queen of England. Shout out to Matilda, and I will be covering them and I will be covering her in a future video. So for this week, humour me while I tell you all about the 9-day Queen. Mary I, Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary, whatever you know her as, she became queen in 1553. She became Queen of England ruling in her own right. However, she was not the first woman to be named ruling Queen of England. That title actually falls on the 16-year-old that she kicked off of the throne and eventually executed, Lady Jane Grey. But before we get to the execution block, let's cover some of the basics, shall we? Short answer, Jane Grey was the great niece of King Henry VIII, that big ginger tyrant that we all know. But Jane was also fourth in line for the throne after Henry, according to his will. So Jane was about 10 years old when Henry died, and her second cousin? Edward became Edward VI. So how exactly then did she find herself being proclaimed Queen of England just 6 years later? The year is 1553 and the teenage King Edward VI is dying. That's an upbeat start, isn't it? And this makes his top advisors pretty nervous. All you need to know is that under Edward's reign, the English government had become very Protestant, and a lot of very Protestant noblemen had worked their way up to powerful positions. But at this point, if Edward VI dies having no heirs, his crown passes on to his older sister Mary, a famously devout Catholic. So in the minds of the noblemen, if Mary takes charge, not only will she undo all the Protestant reforms that they've managed to push through, but all of those super Protestant noblemen, they'd be given the boot, or executed, maybe. Either way, it's not good. So Edward's advisors, namely the top dog, John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, do what anyone would do in this situation. They advise the boy king to essentially put a young woman's life at risk just so that they can maybe keep their jobs. Firstly, Edward creates a document called the Device for the Succession. This essentially changes the line of succession so that the crown instead goes to the male heirs of his second cousin, Jane Grey. The important thing to note here is that the crown didn't go to Jane, it went to her male heirs. The only problem with this is that at the time that he created this document, Jane Grey didn't have any male heirs. She wasn't even pregnant. She wasn't even married. This leads us to step number 2. Northumberland, the politician, married off his son to Jane, and I guess sat there with his fingers crossed and hoped that she gave birth to a son, and quickly. However, it soon became apparent that the boy king, Edward VI, was going to die a lot sooner than they expected, which leads us on to step number 3. Edward VI edited his document, the Device for the Succession, this time naming Jane Grey and her male heirs as the ones to inherit his crown. So with just a few words that he literally scribbled in, or someone scribbled into this document, they changed it from Jane Grey's male heirs to Jane Grey and her male heirs. Just a month or so after scribbling in those new edits to the document, Edward VI died. And just a few days later, on the 10th of July, Jane Grey was named Queen of England. It's a title that she held for a whopping 9 days. So what happened? Long story short, people preferred Mary. Sorry, Jane. Plus, while all this succession and device for the succession nonsense made some kind of convoluted sense to Northumberland and the other Protestant noblemen, it didn't really make sense to anyone else. I can imagine people at the time thinking, why Jane Grey? Yes, of course, skip over Mary and Elizabeth, they're just women. Ugh. But why then pass the crown to another woman who has less of a claim to the throne? crazy women. Also, the noblemen made a mistake when they underestimated Mary, because she was not going to take this decision lying down. Outside of London, she gathered an army of supporters who all proclaimed that she was the rightful Queen of England. It really didn't take a lot. After just a matter of days, a lot of those people who had supported Jane as Queen sort of bailed and fell away and were like, oh, Jane who? No, we love Mary too. And Mary pretty easily took what was rightfully hers. It's not that dramatic, really. Just 9 days after Jane Grey had been named Queen of England, Mary I was proclaimed Queen of England. Jane Grey was, as you'd imagine, arrested, and I honestly don't think that Mary had any intention on executing Jane at this point. It was the following year, in February 1554, after an uprising kicked off against Mary, that Mary, now Mary I, took drastic action. It became clear to Mary that Jane Grey was becoming a sort of figurehead of Protestant rebellion. And it's with that in mind that Jane Grey was eventually executed at the Tower of London at just 16 years old. So there we go. That's the pretty sad history of Lady Jane Grey, the first Queen of England, maybe? What do you think? Honestly, there's so much more I could tell you about all of this. But fortunately for you, I will save my TED Talk for another day. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, give it a like, share it with your friends and family, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and if you really like this fact, you can show your love by buying me a coffee on my Ko-fi page. It's just like leaving me a tip, and it costs the same amount as buying me a coffee. Otherwise, I'm off to film my Lady Jane Grey TED Talk. History fact.